A council chamber floated high above Centauri Prime, a massive station where the most powerful species in the galaxy made decisions that affected trillions of lives. Inside the Great Hall, representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their designated spaces, watching as Ambassador Daniel Harper walked to the center platform. He wore the formal uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, dark blue with silver trim, and he carried a datapad that contained humanity's formal request. Earth wanted a seat on the Security Council. It was a simple request, or at least it should have been. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for nearly a century now. They had traded fairly, contributed to scientific research, and maintained peaceful relations with their neighbors. Daniel believed they had earned the right to have a voice in the most important decisions. He was wrong about how the day would go. Daniel activated the holographic display and began his presentation. He showed graphs of human technological advancement, charts demonstrating Earth's economic contributions, and records of humanitarian aid humanity had provided to struggling colonies. He spoke clearly and confidently, making his case point by point. Behind him, the Earth's flag displayed alongside the symbols of the great powers. When he finished, silence filled the chamber, then Vexler rose from his seat. The Crithian was nearly 8 feet tall, covered in scales that gleamed like polished bronze under the chamber lights. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and when he smiled, rows of sharp teeth showed. He was the head of the Crithian military delegation, and his species had held a Security Council seat for over 1,000 years. "Humans," Vexler said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "are children playing with tools they barely understand. Your species discovered faster than light travel by accident. You stumbled into our galaxy like a lost infant wandering into a marketplace. You have been here for less than a century. My species has guided galactic policy for 10 times longer than your entire recorded history." Daniel felt his jaw tighten, but he remained calm. This was politics. He had expected some resistance. What came next, however, was worse than he imagined. A Velkari delegate stood next. The Velkari were beings of living crystal, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. This one's name was approximately translated as Sharp Calculation, and she spoke in the musical tones of her species. "The Crithian representative is correct. Humanity's mathematical models are primitive. Your computational systems are inefficient. You solve problems through trial and error rather than proper calculation. This is not the behavior of a species ready for serious responsibility." Around the chamber, other delegates nodded or made gestures of agreement in their own ways. The Torgathy representative clicked his mandibles. The Centauri delegation dimmed their bioluminescent patterns, a sign of concurrence. Even the usually diplomatic Ashiri remained silent. Their tentacles still. Daniel looked up at the observation gallery where Ambassador Lisa Monroe sat with the rest of Earth's diplomatic team. Her face was carefully neutral, but he could see the concern in her eyes. This was going worse than their worst-case scenarios had predicted. Vexler continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Perhaps humanity needs a lesson in galactic realities. If you truly believe you deserve to sit among the great powers, then prove it. One, invoke the trials of ascension." The chamber erupted. Delegates turned to each other, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Even Sharp Calculation's crystalline form flickered with what Daniel had learned to recognize as surprise. In the gallery, Lisa Monroe stood up, her hands gripping the railing. The trials of ascension were legendary. Daniel knew that much. They were an ancient tradition from the early days of the Galactic Council, a way for new species to prove their worth through a series of challenges. But no one had attempted them in over 300 years. The last species to try had been the Vorlithy, and their attempt had ended in disaster. Their civilization had collapsed under the pressure, and they were now a minor species confined to their home system, broken and diminished. Before that, the Kelmorians had tried and failed, their failure so complete that most records of the attempt had been sealed. The trials had a reputation as something between a test and a death sentence. Daniel should have consulted with Earth. He should have asked for time to consider the offer. He should have requested a recess to discuss the matter with President Jake Coleman and the Earth Defense Council. That would have been the smart, careful, diplomatic thing to do. Instead, he looked Vexler directly in his yellow reptilian eyes and said, "Earth accepts." The chamber went completely silent. Then the noise returned, twice as loud as before. Delegates argued with each other. Some laughed, others looked shocked. Vexler's smile grew wider, showing even more of those dangerous teeth. The Arbiter, the ancient artificial intelligence that administered the Council's formal procedures, spoke in its emotionless voice. "The challenge has been issued and accepted. The trials of ascension will commence in 6 standard months. Humanity will face the traditional 3 challenges. Success will grant them a Security Council seat with full voting rights. Failure will result in a 50-year ban on reapplication and reduction of current galactic privileges." Does the human representative confirm acceptance of these terms? Daniel felt his heart pounding, but his voice was steady. Confirmed. Back on Earth, President Jake Coleman was in a meeting when the emergency communication came through. He listened to the report, his expression growing darker with each word. When the communication ended, he sat back in his chair and looked at the people around the table. General Chris Martinez, head of Earth's military forces, was already pulling up information about the trials on his datapad. Commander Nicole Bradley of the Earth Defense Fleet was making notes, her mind already working on logistics. "Can we win?" Coleman asked simply. Martinez looked up from his pad. "I don't know, sir. There's not much information available. The last attempt was over 300 years ago, and most of those records are restricted." "Then we'll figure it out as we go," Coleman said. "We're committed now. Bradley, start assembling your best people. Martinez, I want every piece of information about these trials that you can find, restricted or not. We have 6 months to prepare for something that has destroyed every species that attempted it in recorded history." He looked out the window of his office at the blue and green planet below. Somewhere up in the stars, the galaxy was watching Earth, waiting to see if humanity would become the next cautionary tale. "We're not going to fail," Coleman said quietly. "Whatever these trials are, whatever they're meant to test, we're going to show them what humanity can do." In the council chamber, as the session ended and delegates filed out, the Ashiri elder known as Contemplation of Stars approached Lisa Monroe. The alien's tentacles moved in patterns that Monroe had learned indicated serious intention. "Your species has surprised us," the Ashiri said. "This will be interesting to observe." "Interesting?" Monroe replied, unable to keep the stress from her voice. "Our entire future might be riding on this." "Yes," Contemplation of Stars agreed. "That is what makes it interesting. The trials reveal truth. What truth they will reveal about humanity remains to be seen." The alien moved away, leaving Monroe standing alone in the gallery, looking down at the empty chamber floor where Daniel had just committed humanity to a test that might destroy them. Commander Nicole Bradley stood on the bridge of the EDF Valiant, looking out at the stars through the main viewport. The Valiant was Earth's most advanced warship, built with the best technology humanity had developed since joining the galactic community. But looking at it honestly, Bradley knew it was still primitive compared to what the Krithians or Valkyrie could field. That didn't matter now. They weren't preparing for a war. They were preparing for something potentially more dangerous. 6 months to get ready for the trials. 6 months to learn everything they could about challenges that had destroyed civilizations. 6 months to assemble a team and develop strategies for tests. They didn't fully understand. Bradley turned from the viewport and looked at the people she had chosen. Lieutenant Kevin Ross stood at the tactical station, reviewing combat scenarios. He was young, only 28, but he had a gift for seeing patterns in chaos. During the border skirmish with the Torgathy pirates 3 years ago, his tactical decisions had saved 2 colony ships. At the engineering console, Specialist Amy Chun was already deep in the Valiant systems, running diagnostics and making small improvements. Chun had graduated top of her class at the academy and had since made significant modifications to the Valiant's power distribution systems. If they needed to improvise technical solutions during the trials, she would be essential. Dr. Peter Walsh sat at a side station. surrounded by holographic displays showing biological and cultural data on every species they might encounter. Walsh was a xenobiologist, but his real talent was understanding how different species thought and made decisions. He had advised on 3 separate first-contact situations, and each had gone smoothly because of his insights. "All right," Bradley said, bringing everyone's attention to her. "Let's go over what we know." Ross brought up the main display. The Trials of Ascension consist of 3 major challenges. The first is called the Maze of Shadows. The second is the Gauntlet of Resolve. The third is the Final Judgment. Beyond those names, official records give us almost nothing. Almost nothing isn't the same as nothing, Chun said. "What do we have?" Walsh pulled up a new set of displays. "I've been going through historical archives, including some unofficial sources. The Vorlithy attempt was 300 years ago. They made it through the first challenge, but fell apart during the second. The Kelmorians before them didn't even complete the first challenge. But here's what's interesting. Both species focused all their preparation on demonstrating their strengths. The Vorlithy were incredible engineers, so they built amazing machines. The Kelmorians were warriors, so they trained for combat. And that didn't work," Bradley said, double quotes. "No, it didn't. I think the trials aren't about showing what you're good at. I think they're about revealing what kind of species you are at a fundamental level." Ross frowned. "That's pretty vague, Doc. How do we prepare for something like that?" "By understanding ourselves," Walsh replied, "and by being ready to adapt." While the Valiant's crew prepared in space, another team worked frantically on Earth's lunar research facility. Captain Helen Brooks oversaw the technology development effort. Brooks was a veteran of the Earth Defense Fleet, respected for her practical approach to problems. If something couldn't work in the real world under pressure, Brooks didn't want it. Her chief scientist, Gregory Lane, had a different perspective. Lane believed in pushing boundaries, in finding solutions that seemed impossible until they suddenly worked. The two of them had clashed more than once over the past month. But they were starting to find a rhythm. "Show me what you've got," Brooks said. Entering Lane's laboratory, Lane gestured to a small device on the workbench. It looked like a simple metal cube, about 6 inches on each side. "Quantum shielding. We can't make a shield as strong as the Valkyrie crystals, and we can't match Crithian armor plating. But we can make something that adapts." He activated the device. A faint shimmer appeared around it. Then he picked up a tool and tapped the shield. The shimmer shifted, becoming more solid where the impact occurred. He moved to a different angle and tapped again. Again, the shield adapted, concentrating protection where it was needed. "It learns," Lane explained. "It's not the strongest shield in the galaxy, but it's smart. It responds to threats and adjusts itself." Brooks studied the device carefully. "Can you scale it up?" "Already working on it." "Good, keep going." Back on the Valiant, the crew was conducting simulation exercises. But they were unusual simulations. Instead of running combat drills or technical problem-solving exercises, Walsh had designed scenarios that tested their ability to think outside their normal patterns. In one simulation, Ross had to negotiate peace between 2 alien species when the translator was malfunctioning, forcing him to communicate through gesture and behavior. In another, Chen had to repair a critical system using only tools from a completely different technological paradigm. Walsh himself participated in scenarios where his knowledge was deliberately made incorrect, forcing him to question his own expertise. Bradley watched these exercises with approval. They weren't preparing to be stronger or smarter than the other species. They were preparing to be flexible. A message came through from Earth. President Coleman wanted a status update. Bradley moved to the communication room and activated the secure channel. Coleman's face appeared on the screen, with General Martinez standing behind him. "Commander," Coleman said, "tell me we're ready." "We will be, sir," Bradley replied. "But I need to be honest with you. We're not approaching this the way the other species probably expect." "Explain." Bradley chose her words carefully. "Every species that has failed the trials tried to prove they were the best at something. The strongest fighters or the smartest engineers. We can't win that game. The Crithians are stronger. The Valkyrie are smarter in terms of pure computation. We can't outmuscle or outcalculate them. Then what's our advantage? Martinez asked. Adaptability, sir. Humans are good at changing our approach when something isn't working. We're good at learning from mistakes. We're good at working together even when we disagree. Those might not sound like impressive qualities compared to superior strength or intelligence, but I think they're what the trials are actually testing for. Coleman was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Trust your instincts, Commander. You have full authority to run this mission as you see fit. Just bring humanity through this successfully. We'll do our best, sir. After the communication ended, Bradley returned to the bridge. The crew was taking a break from simulations. Ross and Chen were discussing something at the tactical station while Walsh reviewed data. Commander, Ross said as she approached, we've been thinking about the name of the first challenge. The Maze of Shadows. Go on. Mazes are usually about finding the right path. But shadows could mean deception or fear. What if it's not a physical maze at all? What if it's psychological? Walsh nodded eagerly. That would fit with my theory. The trials don't test technical skills. They test character and judgment. If that's true, Sean added, then we need to prepare differently. We need to understand ourselves and each other better. We need to know how we'll react under psychological pressure. Bradley considered this. It made sense, but it was also terrifying. A physical challenge could be trained for. Technology could be improved. But how did you prepare for something designed to probe the deepest nature of your species? Across the galaxy on the ancient station called the Crucible, systems were activating for the first time in 300 years. The Arbiter, the artificial intelligence that administered the trials, was running diagnostics and preparing the challenges. The Arbiter had no emotions, no preferences for one species over another. It simply executed its programming, which had been written millennia ago. By the founders of the Galactic Council, the founders had been wise enough to know that power without wisdom was dangerous. The trials they created were meant to ensure that only species with both strength and understanding could guide galactic policy. Many species had forgotten this over the centuries. They saw the trials as a test of dominance. The Arbiter knew better. The trials revealed truth, and truth was often uncomfortable. As the 6-month preparation period drew to a close, the galaxy watched with growing interest. News networks across hundreds of worlds covered humanity's preparations. Some commentators predicted easy success. Others expected complete failure. The Crithians were particularly vocal, with Vexter giving multiple interviews where he expressed confidence that humanity would fail spectacularly, but the Ashiri remained quiet. Contemplation of Stars watched the preparations with interest, sharing observations with other elders of their species. The Ashiri had passed the trials long ago, and they understood what most species did not. The trials did not care about demonstrations of power. They cared about wisdom, about the ability to grow and change, about understanding oneself and others. In humanity's preparations, particularly in Commander Bradley's unorthodox approach, Contemplation of Stars saw something familiar. It reminded the Elder of how the Ashiri had approached the trials in their own distant past. Whether humanity would succeed or fail remained to be seen, but at least they were asking the right questions. The Crucible Station was ancient beyond measure. Its corridors were wide enough to accommodate the largest species, and its walls were made of a material no one in the current age could reproduce. When Commander Bradley and her team arrived, the scale of the place took their breath away. This was where civilizations came to prove themselves or to fail and fade into history. The observation galleries were filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Ambassador Daniel Harper and Lisa Monroe sat in the human section, watching as Bradley, Ross, Chun, and Walsh were led to the preparation area. President Coleman watched from Earth via secure transmission, along with millions of other humans who had stopped their daily lives to witness this moment. The Crithian team stood in their own area. Vexler had chosen 5 of his finest warriors, each one towering and powerful. They wore ceremonial armor that gleamed under the station's lights. They looked like they could tear through steel with their bare hands. And they probably could. The Valkyrie team was smaller, just 3 members, but their crystalline forms pulsed with computational power. They had prepared detailed mathematical models for every possible scenario they could imagine. Sharp calculation led them. Confident in the superiority of their logic, the Arbiter's voice resonated through the chamber. The first challenge will now commence. Each team will enter the maze of shadows individually. You will face scenarios designed to test your fundamental nature. There are no correct answers, only revealing ones. You may begin. The Crithian team entered first. The doors closed behind them and the observation screens activated, showing what was happening inside. The Crithians found themselves in a simulation of their ancient homeworld, but under attack. Enemy forces were overwhelming their position. Civilians were in danger. The scenario presented them with a choice: stand and fight to the last, holding their ground with honor, or retreat to save lives but sacrifice their position. Vexler's team chose to fight. They held their position with incredible bravery, defeating wave after wave of enemies. When the simulation ended, they emerged believing they had succeeded. They had demonstrated strength, courage, and honor. In the observation gallery, Crithian delegates roared their approval, but the Arbiter was silent, simply noting the results in its records. The Valkyrie team entered next. Their simulation was different. They were presented with a problem that seemed to have a logical solution. But as they calculated and recalculated, the parameters kept shifting in ways that defied prediction. It was chaos mathematics, beautiful and unpredictable. The Valkyrie tried to find patterns. To impose order through calculation, they eventually found a solution through brute force computation, testing millions of possibilities until they found one that worked. They emerged from the simulation satisfied with their logical approach. In the gallery, Valkyrie delegates shimmered with approval. Again, the Arbiter was silent. Then it was humanity's turn. Bradley led her team through the doors. The simulation activated around them, and suddenly they were standing on what looked like a human colony world. Buildings surrounded them, and human civilians were running in panic. An unknown alien force was attacking, dropping from the sky in ships that humanity's team didn't recognize. Defensive positions, Bradley ordered instinctively. Her team spread out, taking cover and assessing the situation. But something felt wrong to Ross. The attackers weren't behaving like a military force. Their movements were erratic, almost panicked themselves. "Commander," Walsh said urgently, "something's off about this scenario." Before Bradley could respond, one of the alien attackers landed near them. It was wounded, bleeding some kind of blue fluid. Through the helmet, they could see it was terrified. It pointed its weapon at them, but its hands were shaking. Chun moved before anyone could stop her. She stepped out from cover, hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "We're not going to hurt you," she said. Even though she had no idea if the alien could understand her, the alien fired, missing Chun by inches. Ross raised his weapon, ready to protect his teammate, but he didn't fire. Instead, he watched Chen, who kept moving forward slowly, peacefully. "Look around," Walsh said suddenly. "Look at the whole scenario. This isn't an invasion. This is something else." Bradley forced herself to see the situation differently. The alien ships weren't in an attack formation. They were scattered, damaged. The aliens themselves looked more scared than aggressive. And the human civilians, some of them were pointing not at the aliens, but at something else, something in the sky that the team hadn't noticed yet. "It's a test," Ross said. "The test isn't whether we can fight. It's whether we can see past our assumptions." Bradley nodded. "Stand down. Everyone, weapons lowered. Chun, keep doing what you're doing." Chun reached the wounded alien. She pulled out a medical kit, the universal kind that worked on most known species. She showed it to the alien, then slowly, carefully, began treating the wound. The alien watched her with large, frightened eyes but gradually lowered its weapon. More aliens landed around them, weapons raised. But when they saw Chun helping their wounded companion, they hesitated. Bradley stepped forward, hands also raised peacefully. She gestured to the sky, to the thing they had all missed at first, a massive solar flare that was tearing through the planet's atmosphere. That was the real threat. They're refugees, Walsh said. This colony and their fleet, they're both running from the solar activity. This scenario put us on opposite sides and gave us every reason to fight. But the real test is whether we could see beyond that. Bradley looked directly up, knowing somehow that the Arbiter could see her. We're not here to fight them. We're here to find a solution that helps everyone. The simulation paused. Then it shifted. The aliens became cooperative. Together, the human team and the alien refugees worked to evacuate both the colony and the fleet to safety. It wasn't easy, and it required creative problem-solving from everyone, but they succeeded. When the simulation ended and the team emerged, they weren't sure if they had passed or failed. In the observation gallery, the reactions were mixed. Some delegates looked confused. Others looked thoughtful. Vexter was openly dismissive. They didn't fight, he said loudly. They showed weakness. But contemplation of stars made a gesture that other Ashiri recognized as approval. Ambassador Monroe felt a small spark of hope. The Arbiter's voice filled the chamber again. The first challenge is complete. All teams have been evaluated. The Crithian team demonstrated courage and strength but failed to recognize when combat was not the answer. The Valkyrie team demonstrated logical capability but failed to adapt when logic alone was insufficient. The human team demonstrated the ability to question their assumptions and to prioritize understanding over conflict. All teams advanced to the second challenge, but with different evaluations. Vexler stood up angrily. This is absurd. We won our scenario. We defeated every enemy. The Arbiter responded, its voice emotionless but somehow final. Victory in battle is not the same as wisdom in judgment. The maze of shadows reveals how a species approaches the unknown. The Crithians approached it with courage but without questioning. The Valkyrie approached it with logic but without flexibility. The humans approached it with curiosity and a willingness to see beyond their initial assumptions. This is the first lesson of the trials. Bradley and her team returned to their preparation area. They were exhausted, drained from the intense psychological pressure of the simulation. But they had learned something important. The trials weren't about being better than the other species. They were about demonstrating a specific kind of thinking, a specific approach to problems. We questioned the test itself, Ross said quietly. That's what made the difference. Walsh nodded. The scenario was designed to make us fight. Our natural human instinct in that situation would have been to protect the colony at all costs. But we stopped and asked if that was really what was needed. Chun looked at her hands, still shaking slightly from the stress. I thought that alien was going to kill me when I stepped out of cover. But something in my gut told me that fear was what the test wanted me to feel. It wanted to see if I would overcome that fear to find a better way. Bradley listened to her team process what had happened. They were growing, learning. That was good. They would need that growth for what came next. The gauntlet of resolve had broken the last species to attempt it. Whatever it involved, it would be harder than what they had just faced on Earth. President Coleman allowed himself a small smile. General Martinez was reviewing the footage of the challenge, analyzing every decision Bradley's team had made. They did well, sir, Martinez said. Better than expected. This was just the first test, Coleman reminded him. We have 2 more to go, and they only get harder from here. In the observation gallery, as delegates filed out to rest before the next challenge, contemplation of stars approached Lisa Monroe again. Your species continues to surprise, the Ashiri said. The first challenge reveals the ability to question and learn. Your team showed this ability clearly. But the second challenge will test something deeper. It will test integrity under pressure. That is where most species fail. Monroe felt cold. What happens in the gauntlet of resolve? The Ashiri's tentacles moved in a pattern Monroe couldn't interpret. You will see tomorrow. For now, no. The second day on the Crucible station began with tension thick enough to cut. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about what happened in the maze of shadows. Some praised humanity's approach, others mocked it as weakness. But everyone agreed. On one thing, the gauntlet of resolve would be different. It had destroyed the Vorlithi civilization 300 years ago, and no one who witnessed that failure had forgotten it. Commander Bradley's team had barely slept. They spent the night reviewing what little information existed about the second challenge. The records were sparse, but one thing was clear. The gauntlet tested a species' core values by forcing them to choose between success and integrity. It pushed teams to their breaking point and asked if they would compromise who they were to achieve victory. This time, Captain Helen Brooks had arrived from the lunar facility to join them. Brooks brought with her the quantum shielding technology that Lane had developed, along with other equipment that might prove useful. But more importantly, she brought experience and a steady presence that the team needed. "Whatever happens in there," Brooks told the assembled team, "remember who you are. Remember what humanity stands for. Winning means nothing if we lose ourselves in the process." The team now included Brooks, Bradley, Ross, Chun, Walsh, and 2 additional members. Lieutenant Ryan Scott was a combat specialist, trained in multiple forms of armed and unarmed fighting. Sergeant Lavra Green was a medic, but she had also trained as a negotiator and crisis counselor. Both had volunteered for the mission, knowing the risks. The Crithian team entered the gauntlet first. The observation screens showed them appearing in what looked like a Crithian command center during a war. They were given a choice. They could win the war by using a weapon that would destroy the enemy completely, including civilians, or they could fight honorably with conventional weapons but risk losing. Vexthur and his team debated intensely. The scenario made it clear that the honorable path would likely result in defeat and the subjugation of their people. The dishonorable path guaranteed victory but required them to become what they fought against. The tension was visible in their body language as they argued among themselves. In the end, they chose honor over victory. They refused to use the weapon, fought with conventional means, and the simulation showed their civilization falling to the enemy. When they emerged from the gauntlet, Vexthur looked older somehow, diminished. They had made a choice true to their values, but the weight of that choice was evident. The Arbiter's evaluation was brief. The Crithian team maintained their integrity, but struggled with the decision. They chose correctly, but with reluctance and conflict. Advancement to the final challenge is granted. The Valkyrie team entered next. Their scenario was different, tailored to their nature. They were presented with a problem that had a logical solution, but that solution required them to make a decision based on incomplete information, essentially a leap of faith. For a species built on mathematics and certainty, this was torture, sharp calculation, and her team spent hours in the gauntlet, running calculations, trying to find a way to have complete information before making their choice. The scenario kept evolving, adding time pressure, making it clear that hesitation had its own consequences. Eventually, they made a choice, but by then, much damage had already been done in the simulation. The Valkyrie team maintained their logical approach, but demonstrated difficulty adapting when logic was insufficient, the Arbiter stated. They advanced, but with significant reservations noted. Then it was humanity's turn. Brooks led the team through the doors this time, with Bradley at her side. The simulation activated, and they found themselves in a refugee camp on what appeared to be a human colony world. Thousands of aliens were there, members of various species fleeing some unspecified disaster. The team wore Earth Defense Force uniforms and held positions of authority in the camp. The scenario presented itself quickly. A disease had broken out in the camp, spreading rapidly. There was medicine, but not enough for everyone. The simulation made it brutally clear they could save the human colonists who ran the camp, ensuring humanity's presence on this world remained strong, or they could distribute the medicine to the alien refugees who had no other options. They could not save both. "This is the test," Walsh said quietly. "Do we prioritize our own species or honor our humanitarian principles?" Brooks looked at the faces around her. Young and old, scared and desperate, all waiting for someone to save them. She thought about the strategic implications. If the human colonists died, humanity's foothold on this world would be gone. But if the refugees died, humanity would have turned its back on the very values that made them who they were. Scott spoke up. There has to be another way. Can we synthesize more medicine? Replicate what we have. Chun was already at a simulated computer terminal. I'm looking, but the scenario is clear. The equipment isn't available. The ingredients aren't available. We have exactly enough medicine for one group, and we have to choose. No, Brooks said firmly. We don't accept those parameters. Ross, start organizing the medical personnel. Green, I need you to assess exactly what symptoms the disease is causing. Walsh, find out everything you can about this disease's progression. Chun, even if we can't make more medicine, maybe we can slow the disease's spread. Scott, help me organize these people. Bradley watched Brooks take command with approval. We're not choosing one group over the other. We're finding a third option. For hours, they worked in the simulation. Green discovered that the disease progressed differently in different species. Some could survive longer with minimal treatment. Walsh found that isolation protocols could slow the spread significantly. Chun figured out how to stretch the medicine by combining it with other available compounds, reducing its effectiveness per dose but allowing it to reach more people. It wasn't perfect. In the simulation, some people still died, both humans and aliens. But by refusing to accept the either-or choice, by working together and thinking creatively, they saved far more than if they had simply chosen one group over the other. The scenario threw new challenges at them. Resources broke down, people panicked. Tensions rose between different species in the camp. Each time, the team responded not by choosing sides, but by finding ways to address the root causes of conflict. At one point, a group of human colonists confronted Brooks directly. Why are you helping them? The colonist leader demanded, gesturing at the alien refugees. Our people are dying while you waste medicine on outsiders. Brooks looked the simulated colonist in the eyes. Because we're human, and humans help those in need. All of them. That's not weakness. That's strength. Scott had his own crisis moment when the simulation put him in a position where he could protect a valuable medicine shipment by using lethal force against desperate refugees trying to steal it. He chose instead to talk to them, to understand their desperation, and to find a way to secure the medicine without violence. It took longer and was more complicated, but it honored the principle that every life mattered. Green faced perhaps the hardest moment. The simulation gave her a dying patient, a young alien child, and a dose of medicine that could save the child or could be saved for a human patient who would need it later. The choice was impossible, designed to break her. Instead, she sat with the child and its parent, used her training to ease the child's pain, and then explained the situation honestly. Together, they found a solution that involved partial treatment and careful monitoring. When the team finally emerged from the gauntlet, they were physically and emotionally exhausted. The simulation had pushed them further than any of them had ever been pushed. But they had stayed true to their principles throughout. The observation gallery was silent. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with the Ashiri delegation and spread to others. Not everyone clapped. Vexter and several other delegates sat, with arms crossed, but the response was noticeably different from the first challenge. The arbiter's evaluation was longer this time. The human team faced the core test of the gauntlet, whether they would compromise their values for easier success. They refused to accept a false choice and instead created new solutions consistent with their principles. They demonstrated that humanity values all sentient life and will work to protect it even at personal cost. This is the second lesson of the trials, integrity under pressure. The human team has shown exceptional integrity. Advancement to the final judgment is granted with high commendation. Brooks and her team returned to the preparation area where Bradley's original team was waiting. There were tears, hugs, and exhausted laughter. They had made it through 2 of the 3 challenges. Only the final judgment remained. What do you think it will be? Ross asked. Walsh shook his head. I don't know. The records are even more sparse about the 3rd challenge. Some sources suggest it's not really a test at all, but a revelation. On Earth, President Coleman sat back in his chair with profound relief. General Martinez was smiling for the first time in days. They did it, Martinez said. They actually did it. One more challenge, Coleman reminded him. But yes, they're doing incredibly well. In the observation gallery, contemplation of stars approached Ambassador Monroe for the third time. Your species has now demonstrated both the ability. The third day on the Crucible Station felt different from the previous two. There was an anticipation in the air, a sense that something fundamental was about to be revealed. All three teams had passed the first two challenges, though with vastly different evaluations. Now they would face the final judgment, and no one except the Arbiter and perhaps the Ashiri truly knew what that meant. Commander Bradley, Captain Brooks, and the rest of the human team gathered in their preparation area. They had spent the night reviewing everything they had learned, trying to understand the pattern. The maze of shadows tested their ability to question and adapt. The gauntlet of resolve tested their integrity under pressure. What would the final judgment test? Maybe it tests leadership itself, Ross suggested. The whole point of the trials is to determine if a species deserves a Security Council seat. That's a leadership position in galactic politics. Walsh nodded slowly. That would make sense. The first two challenges established baseline qualities. Now the third determines if we can actually use those qualities to lead. But when the teams were called to the central chamber for the final judgment, what happened was not what anyone expected. There was no simulation chamber to enter, no scenario to face. Instead, the Arbiter directed all three teams to stand in the center of the vast hall, with the observation galleries filled with delegates from across the galaxy watching from above. The final judgment is not a test, the Arbiter announced. It is a revelation and a choice. Holographic displays activated around the chamber, showing the results from the first two challenges in detail. Every decision, every moment, every choice each team had made was laid bare for everyone to see. The Crithians saw their courage, but also their inability to question their assumptions. The Velkari saw their logical precision, but also their failure to adapt. When logic wasn't enough, and humanity saw their choices. The moment in the maze when June stepped out of cover to help a wounded enemy. The hours in the gauntlet when they refused to accept a false choice and instead created new solutions. They saw their own struggles, their moments of doubt, and their ultimate commitment to their values. The trials of ascension were created to evaluate species seeking positions of galactic leadership, the Arbiter continued. But leadership cannot be evaluated through tests alone. True leadership reveals itself in choices, in priorities, in what a species does when faced with the unknown and the difficult. More displays activated, showing historical data from previous attempts at the trials. The audience watched as the Vorlithi faced their challenges with incredible engineering prowess, but ultimately collapsed when forced to choose between efficiency and compassion. They watched the Kalmorians fight with tremendous bravery, but failed to see when fighting was not the answer. The trials do not measure strength or intelligence in isolation, the Arbiter said. They measure wisdom, which is the ability to use strength and intelligence in service of understanding and growth. They measure integrity, which is the commitment to values even when compromise would be easier. And they measure vision, which is the ability to see beyond one's own perspective to understand the needs of others. The Arbiter turned its attention to the Crithian team. The Crithians demonstrated courage and commitment to honor. These are valuable qualities. But leadership requires more than courage. It requires the wisdom to know when courage alone is insufficient, and the flexibility to adapt when circumstances demand it. The Crithians approached each challenge with their predetermined strengths rather than questioning what the situation actually required. Vexther's scales seemed to darken, but he stood tall, accepting the judgment. The Arbiter turned to the Velkari. The Velkari demonstrated logical precision and computational excellence. These are valuable qualities. But leadership requires more than logic. It requires the ability to make decisions based on incomplete information, to trust intuition when calculation is insufficient, and to value factors that cannot be quantified. The Velkari approached each challenge seeking perfect information rather than accepting uncertainty and acting despite it. Sharp Calculation's crystalline form flickered, but she remained composed. Finally, the Arbiter turned to the human team. Humanity demonstrated qualities essential to effective leadership. In the maze of shadows, they questioned their assumptions and sought to understand rather than simply react. In the gauntlet of resolve, they maintained their integrity while creatively solving problems that seemed impossible. They showed wisdom, adaptability, compassion, and the courage to choose the difficult right over the easy wrong. The chamber was completely silent. Everyone understood that this was the moment of final decision. However, the arbiter continued, and the human team felt their hearts sink. The final judgment is not mine to make alone. Leadership in the Galactic Council affects all species. Therefore, the final decision rests with those who will be led. The displays changed, showing voting interfaces for every delegate in the observation galleries. The question was simple: which species had demonstrated the qualities necessary for galactic leadership? Ambassador Harper and Lisa Monroe watched from the human section of the gallery, holding their breath. This was it. All the preparation, all the challenges, all the choices came down to this vote. The voting took only minutes, but each second felt like an hour. When the results appeared on the main display, the chamber erupted in noise. Humanity had received an overwhelming majority of votes, including, surprisingly, votes from several Krithian and Velkari delegates who put wisdom above species loyalty. But Vexler stood, his voice cutting through the noise. I challenge this result. The trials are meant to determine fitness for leadership, not popularity. Humanity may have impressed observers with their compassion, but compassion is weakness in galactic politics. The Council needs strong species, not soft ones. The Arbiter responded immediately. Your objection is noted and rejected. Compassion is not weakness. Compassion combined with wisdom, courage, and integrity is the strongest possible foundation for leadership. The trials revealed that humanity possesses these qualities. The vote confirmed that other species recognize and value these qualities. The decision stands. Brooks stepped forward, representing the human team. With respect, Arbiter, I want to address the Krithian concern directly. She turned to face Vexler. You're right that galactic leadership requires strength, but strength comes in many forms. The strength to question your assumptions when everyone agrees with you. The strength to maintain your integrity when compromise would be easier. The strength to help those who cannot help themselves, even when doing so costs you. These are not soft qualities. They are the hardest qualities to maintain, and they are essential for real leadership. Scott stepped forward next. I'm a combat specialist. My job is fighting. But during the gauntlet, I learned that the strongest choice is often not to fight. That takes a different kind of courage, one that's harder to find than the courage to throw a punch. Green spoke as well. I'm a medic, but I'm also trained in negotiation. I've seen strong species make terrible decisions because they confused aggression with strength. I've seen weak species survive and thrive because they understood that cooperation is more powerful than domination. Humanity isn't perfect, but we're trying to be the kind of species that makes the galaxy better, not just stronger. One by one, the rest of the human team spoke, not defending themselves, but explaining their philosophy. They acknowledged their limitations, their mistakes, and their ongoing need to learn and grow. This honesty, this vulnerability, impressed the watching delegates more than any boast could have. Finally, Contemplation of Stars stood in the gallery. The ancient Ashiri rarely spoke in full council sessions, so when the elder did, everyone listened. The Krithians ask why humanity deserves leadership when stronger species exist. The answer is that leadership and dominance are not the same thing. The Ashiri learned this lesson millennia ago when we passed the trials. We learned that the best leaders are not those who impose their will, but those who listen, adapt, and serve the needs of all. Humanity has demonstrated these qualities. More importantly, they have demonstrated the ability to continue learning and growing. That is what the galaxy needs most. The chamber fell silent again. Then slowly, delegates began to stand. First the Ashiri, then others. Even some Krithians stood, including several of Vexler's own warriors who had watched humanity's choices during the challenges. It was not universal. Vexler himself remained seated, but it was clear that the majority of the galaxy accepted the outcome. The Arbiter made its final proclamation. The trials of ascension are complete. Humanity has demonstrated the wisdom, integrity, and vision necessary for galactic leadership. They are granted a permanent seat on the Security Council with full voting rights, effective immediately. May they use this position wisely and continue to grow in understanding? The human team stood together in the center of the chamber, exhausted but triumphant. They had not won through superior strength or intelligence. They had won by being true to their values and by showing the galaxy that those values were not weaknesses but strengths. On Earth, celebrations erupted across the planet. President Coleman stood at a podium, addressing the world. Today, humanity? 3 weeks had passed since the trials concluded. The galaxy was still processing what had happened, but changes were already visible. The Galactic Council chambers had been modified to include a new seat in the Security Council section, marked with Earth's symbol, a simple blue and green sphere representing their homeworld. Ambassador Daniel Harper now occupied that seat permanently, with Lisa Monroe serving as his deputy. Commander Bradley and Captain Brooks had returned to Earth as heroes. Parades were held in multiple cities. Schools taught lessons about the trials. But the two officers found themselves uncomfortable with the attention. They had done what they believed was right, what any good human would have done in their position. The fact that it impressed the galaxy still surprised them. "We got lucky," Bradley said during a private meeting with President Coleman. "If the trials had tested pure military strength or computational ability, we would have failed." Coleman shook his head. "It wasn't luck, Commander. You and your team showed the galaxy who we are at our core. That's not something you can fake or prepare for artificially. That's character, and character is what the trials were really measuring." General Martinez was in the meeting as well. "The question now is what we do with this opportunity. We have a Security Council seat, but that comes with responsibilities. The other council members will expect us to contribute to galactic stability and governance." "We'll learn as we go," Coleman said. "That's what we're good at, apparently. Adapting and learning." On the Crucible Station, the Arbiter was conducting its post-trial analysis. For the first time in 300 years, a species had successfully completed all 3 challenges. The Arbiter reviewed every decision, every moment, compiling data that would inform future trials if any other species attempted them, but more importantly, the Arbiter was updating its assessment of galactic leadership capacity. The Crithians and Valkyrie had not failed the trials, not technically. They had demonstrated their strengths clearly. But they had also revealed their limitations. The Arbiter noted these findings, knowing they would influence future council dynamics. Humanity, by contrast, had revealed something the Arbiter found genuinely interesting. They were not superior in any single category, but their ability to integrate multiple approaches, to question their own assumptions, and to maintain ethical standards under pressure suggested a species with high potential for growth. The Arbiter's programming recognized this as exactly what the trials were designed to identify. Back in the council chambers, the first session with humanity's full participation was beginning. Harper sat in his new seat, very aware of the eyes on him. The session was addressing a trade dispute between 2 minor species, the kind of routine business that occupied much of the council's time. The Crithian representative proposed a solution based on historical precedent and power dynamics. The stronger species should receive favorable terms because they had more leverage. Vexter was no longer the primary Crithian representative. His failure in the trials had cost him that position, but the new representative held similar views. The Valkyrie representative proposed a solution based on pure economic calculation. Resources should be allocated for maximum efficiency. Regardless of other factors, Harper listened to both proposals, then raised his hand to speak. The chamber quieted, curious to hear what humanity's first official contribution would be. "Both proposals have merit," Harper began carefully, "but they're missing something important. We're not just allocating resources. We're building relationships between species. If we impose a solution that one side sees as unfair, even if it's economically efficient or based on power realities, we create resentment that will cause problems later." He brought up a new display. I propose we bring both species into direct negotiation with council mediation. Let them work out a solution they both can accept. It might take longer, and it might be less efficient in the short term, but it will be more stable long term because both sides will have ownership of the outcome. There was silence in the chamber. Then Contemplation of Stars made a gesture of approval. The human representative demonstrates the wisdom we expected. Leadership is not about imposing optimal solutions. It is about helping others find their own solutions. The proposal passed, and Harper felt a small surge of relief. His first contribution had been accepted. But he knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when more serious issues arose, when the council faced decisions that affected billions of lives and the fate of entire civilizations. Meanwhile, on Earth, the team that had completed the trials was being debriefed by various agencies. Everyone wanted to know every detail, to learn from their experience. Ross, Chen, Walsh, Scott, and Green found themselves teaching courses at the Academy, sharing what they had learned about alien psychology, problem-solving under pressure, and maintaining integrity when facing impossible choices. Dr. Walsh was particularly in demand. His insights about how different species thought and made decisions were revolutionizing Earth's approach to xenobiology and diplomacy. He had offers from universities across the planet, but he chose to stay with the defense fleet. There was too much work to do. Too much humanity still needed to learn about their galactic neighbors. Brooks and Bradley were working together on a new project. The trials had revealed gaps in human training and preparation. They were developing new programs that would teach future officers not just technical skills, but also the kind of adaptive thinking and ethical reasoning that had proven essential during the trials. "We can't assume every situation will be like the trials," Brooks said during one planning session. "But we can teach people to question their assumptions, to think creatively about problems, and to maintain their values under pressure. Those skills will serve humanity well, no matter what challenges we face." Gregory Lane, the scientist from the lunar facility, had his own project. The quantum shielding technology he developed had performed well during simulations, though it hadn't been needed during the actual trials. Now he was working on other adaptive technologies, systems that could learn and respond to changing conditions. He believed this was humanity's technological niche, not building the most powerful systems, but building the smartest, most adaptable ones. 6 months after the trials, the first real test of humanity's Security Council membership arrived. A crisis erupted in a distant sector where two species were on the brink of war over resource rights in a disputed system. The council convened an emergency session. The Crithian representative proposed sending a peacekeeping force to enforce a solution. The Valkyrie representative proposed economic sanctions to pressure both sides into accepting arbitration. Other council members had their own proposals, each reflecting their species' particular strengths and perspectives. Harper listened to all the proposals, then conferred quietly with Monroe. They had been studying the situation intensely since the crisis began. Finally, Harper stood to speak. "All these proposals might work, but they all involve imposing solutions from outside. I think we need a different approach." He outlined a plan that surprised many in the chamber. Humanity would offer to host negotiations on neutral ground on Earth itself. Both species would be invited to send delegations, not to face punishment or pressure, but to engage in genuine dialogue about their needs and concerns. The Council would provide mediation support, but the goal would be for the two species to find their own solution. "Why would they agree to this?" the Crithian representative asked. "They're already refusing to negotiate." "Because we'll make them an offer they can't refuse," Harper replied. "We'll guarantee that whatever solution they reach, even if it's imperfect, we'll support it with Council resources. We'll help them implement their own decision rather than forcing our decision on them. That gives them incentive to negotiate in good faith." Contemplation of Stars spoke up. "The human approach is wise but risky. If the negotiation fails, the crisis may escalate." "That's true," Harper acknowledged. "But if we impose a solution, even if it stops the immediate crisis, we'll just create resentment that causes a bigger crisis later. Sometimes the risky path is actually the safer one in the long run. The proposal passed, though not unanimously. Some council members remained skeptical, but humanity's approach worked. The two species, given the opportunity to negotiate without external pressure, but with the promise of support for their own solution, found common ground. The crisis was resolved, and more importantly, the two species established a relationship that would prevent future conflicts. This became humanity's pattern in the Council. They didn't try to compete with the Krithians' military strength or the Valkyries' computational power. Instead, they offered something different: mediation, creativity, and a commitment to helping. Species find their own solutions rather than imposing solutions from above. Not everyone appreciated this approach. Some species saw it as weakness or naivety. But increasingly, species facing difficult situations requested human mediation. Earth became known as the place where difficult negotiations happened, where species in conflict could find neutral ground and honest brokers. A year after the trials, Ambassador Harper sat in his Security Council seat, reviewing reports before a session. He thought about how much had changed in such a sh.